Look at the screen in front of you. Now picture a different screen. In a lab at NASA, an astrophysicist is staring at an image from the Webb Telescope, a window looking 13 billion years into the past, searching for the faintest glimmers of how we got here. We spend billions to look for our origins at the edge of the universe. Except, what if the answer isn't out there? What if it's right here, buried under the Iraqi desert? What if the story of our creation, our purpose, and our future wasn't written in the stars but etched onto clay tablets by a civilization that peered out of nowhere, fully formed 6,000 years ago? They told us exactly where we came from, and they told us who was coming back for us. This isn't just mythology. This is a cosmic timetable, and the clock is about to strike 0. And if you're using this video to fall asleep, perfect. That's exactly what it's for. So maybe hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. I genuinely love checking those. It's wild seeing London at sunrise, New York at lunch, Los Angeles at midnight, all watching at the same time. Tonight, we are going on a journey that will challenge everything you think you know about human history. We are not going to talk about vague theories or abstract possibilities. We are going to follow a trail of evidence that begins in the dust of ancient Sumeria and ends with modern astronomers searching for a ghost planet at the edge of our own solar system. We will decode a story of gods who are not gods, a planet that should not exist, and a prophecy that counts down not in years, but in millennia. This is the story of the Anunnaki and their 3,600-year cycle of return. We will uncover why they came here, what they did to us, and what their imminent return could mean for every single person on this planet. So, settle in and prepare to have your understanding of the past completely shattered. Picture the world around 6,000 years ago. Humanity exists in scattered Neolithic villages. We are barely agricultural, just figuring out pottery and the basics of animal domestication. Our world is small, local, and technologically primitive. Then, in the Fertile Crescent, in the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something impossible happens. Out of nowhere, a civilization explodes into existence. Not gradually, not over centuries, but in a sudden, unprecedented flash of brilliance. This is Sumer. They invent writing, the wheel, and the sail. They develop the first legal codes, the first schools, the first cities. Their understanding of mathematics is staggering. They use a base 60 system, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and 360 degrees in a circle. Think about that. Their mathematical DNA is embedded in the way you measure your own life, right now. Their knowledge of the cosmos was even more baffling. They mapped the heavens with a precision that should have been impossible. They knew about the planets in our solar system, from Mercury to Neptune, and they knew it all without telescopes. How? How did a supposedly primitive people possess a level of scientific and cultural sophistication that would not be seen again for thousands of years? The Sumerians themselves gave a very clear answer. They said they were taught, they wrote it all down. In the mid-19th century, archaeologists unearthed the ruins of ancient Sumerian cities like Uruk and Ur. They found hundreds of thousands of baked clay tablets, covered in a complex script known as cuneiform. For decades, scholars painstakingly translated these texts, believing they were reading mythologies, allegories about the sun and the moon, primitive man's attempt to explain the world. They read of gods with immense power, gods who descended from the heavens in fiery chariots, gods who lived for thousands of years, and gods who literally created mankind to be their slaves. The story you think you know, the one about gods and myths, is incomplete, because one man looked at these translations and saw something entirely different. He saw not myth, but history. His name was Zechariah Sitchin. He was one of only a handful of scholars in the world who could read Sumerian cuneiform in its original form. And what he proposed was so radical, so profoundly world-altering, that he was ostracized by the mainstream academic community. Sitchin claimed that his colleagues were making a fundamental mistake. They were translating the tablets through the lens of their own modern beliefs, assuming any talk of sky gods must be allegory. Sitchin decided to take the texts literally. What if the Sumerians were not writing about metaphorical gods, but were in fact writing a detailed journalistic account of their own history? When you do that, the story changes completely. The word for their deities was ANUNNAKI, and Sitchin's literal translation was not gods, it was those who from heaven to earth came. This wasn't a pantheon of imaginary beings. This was a description of a race of advanced biological, flesh and blood extraterrestrials who visited Earth in our remote past. They weren't supernatural, they were technologically superior. Their fiery chariots were spacecraft. Their impossibly long lifespans were simply a product of their native biology, living on a world with a much, much slower orbit around its sun. And this is where the puzzle pieces begin to lock into place with terrifying precision. The Sumerian tablets speak of a 12th member of our solar system. Not 11 as we count them today, the sun, moon, and 9 planets. They counted 12. The 12th was the homeworld of the Anunnaki, a colossal planet on a vast elliptical orbit that took 3,600 Earth years to complete one journey around our sun. They called this planet NIBIRU, the planet of the crossing. According to Sitchin's translation of texts like the Enuma Elish, the Sumerian epic of creation, Nibiru was an invader into our solar system billions of years ago. It was pulled in by our sun's gravity and wreaked havoc. On one of its early passes, one of Nibiru's moons collided with an ancient planet that existed between Mars and Jupiter. That planet, called Tiamat, was shattered. One half became the asteroid belt. The other half was thrown into a new orbit, carrying one of Tiamat's moons with it, and became the Earth and our moon. This is a mind-blowing concept. The Sumerians, 6,000 years ago, described a celestial collision that perfectly explains the existence of the asteroid belt and the unique, codependent relationship between the Earth and our disproportionately large moon. Modern science, with its giant impact hypothesis, has only recently come to a similar conclusion. The Sumerians had it written down thousands of years ago, but this cosmic history was just the prologue. The truly important part of the story begins with Nibiru's orbit, that 3,600-year cycle. This wasn't just a celestial event, it was the master clock of human history. The Sumerians measured time in units called a sar, which was equal to 3,600 years. One orbit of Nibiru. And every time Nibiru returned to the inner solar system, on its long journey back out to the void, its trajectory would bring it close to Earth. These moments of passage were not quiet flybys. They were the moments when the Anunnaki could most easily travel between their world and ours. They were the moments when everything on Earth changed. Think about what this implies. If this is true, our history is not a smooth, linear progression. It is a series of quantum leaps, punctuated by periods of stagnation, all dictated by the return of this one planet. A 3,600-year cycle of divine intervention, of technological seeding, and of planetary upheaval. So let's follow the timeline. Let's look at the clock. According to the texts, the Anunnaki first arrived on Earth around 445,000 years ago. Their mission was desperate. Their homeworld, Nibiru, was dying. Its atmosphere was eroding, bleeding heat into space. Their scientists had determined a solution: suspending fine particles of gold in their upper atmosphere to create a protective shield, reflecting light and heat back onto the planet. It's the same principle behind the thin layer of gold used on the visors of our own astronauts' helmets. But Nibiru was pouring gold. The one planet in the solar system known to have vast accessible reserves was Earth. So they came here. They established a base, Eridu, in what is now southern Iraq, and they began to mine. For tens of thousands of years, the rank and file Anunnaki toiled in the mines of southeastern Africa, extracting the precious metal and shipping it back to their home world. But the work was brutal. The Anunnaki were not gods. They could get tired, they could rebel, and after millennia of hard labour, they did. The texts describe a mutiny. The miners refused to work any longer. This created a crisis for the Anunnaki leadership. A commander named Enlil and his brilliant chief scientist, a brother named Enki. A solution was needed, and it was Enki who proposed a plan that would forever alter the course of life on this planet. He suggested they create a primitive worker, a slave race, to take over the labour in the mines. They wouldn't create this worker from scratch. They would use genetic engineering. The raw material was already here, walking the plains of Africa. An early hominid, what we would now likely call Homo erectus. Enki proposed taking the essence of the Anunnaki, their genetic code, and mixing it with the egg of a primitive hominid. The Sumerian tablets describe this process in astonishing detail, speaking of mixing the clay of the earth with the blood of the gods, and using Anunnaki females as the first surrogate mothers. The result? The first human, the Adamu. In Sumerian, this translates to earthling. They were created for one purpose: to be a worker, a Lulu Amelu, a mixed worker. This single idea, if you dare to entertain it, solves some of the most profound mysteries in human evolution. The famous missing link. It doesn't exist because there was no slow, gradual evolution from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens. There was a sudden, artificial leap, a genetic upgrade. It explains the explosion of brain size and complexity in our ancestors, a change so rapid it defies the normal pace of natural selection. It explains why our own human genome is filled with what geneticists call junk DNA, vast stretches of code with no apparent function. What if it's not junk? What if it's the deactivated remnants of a far more advanced genetic inheritance? What if our true potential is locked away inside us, waiting for a key? Humanity was born. We were bred to serve, to mine the gold that would save a distant world, while our creators ruled over us as omnipotent gods. And for hundreds of thousands of years, this was the status quo. But something else was happening. The clock was ticking. Nibiru continued its long, lonely orbit, and its periodic return to our part of the solar system brought not just the Anunnaki, but immense gravitational chaos. Around 13,000 years ago, one such passage was particularly devastating. As the massive planet moved through the solar system, its gravitational pull destabilized the ice sheet of Antarctica, causing a catastrophic slippage into the ocean. This triggered a global deluge of unimaginable scale, the Great Flood. This isn't just a story in the Bible. A great flood myth is one of the most persistent and universal stories in human culture, found in hundreds of civilizations across the globe, from the Epic of Gilgamesh to the legends of Native American tribes. They all tell the same story of a world drowned by water sent from the heavens. According to the Sumerian texts, this was a predictable, natural disaster caused by Nibiru's flyby, and the Anunnaki knew it was coming. Enlil, the commander, who is often portrayed as harsh and unsympathetic to humanity, saw this as an opportunity to wipe the slate clean, to destroy his noisy, troublesome creation. But Enki, the scientist who had helped create us, had grown fond of his creatures. He saw our potential. In secret, he went to one human, a man known in Sumerian texts as Ziusudra, and in the Bible as Noah. He instructed him to build a submersible vessel, a preserver of life, and gave him the schematics to save himself, his family, and the seed of all living things. The flood came and wiped civilization off the face of the earth, but humanity survived, thanks to the intervention of our Creator. The Anunnaki then had to start again. They chose to re-establish civilization, teaching humanity agriculture, animal husbandry, and all the arts of civilized life. This was the beginning of our current era. The next pass of Nibiru, 3,600 years after the one that caused the flood, marked another great turning point. Around 3,800 to 3,600 BC, civilization didn't just restart, it exploded. This was the birth of Sumer. The Anunnaki, realizing they needed humanity to be more organized and productive, gave us the tools of high civilization. Kingship was lowered from heaven. Science, law, astronomy, all of it was given to us in a sudden, incredible burst. This timeline is staggering in its implications. The clock of Nibiru seems to perfectly align with the great, inexplicable leaps in our own history. The next tick of the clock would be another 3,600 years later. What happened then? Around the time of Abraham, around 2000 BC, we see the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, described in the Bible as a rain of fire and brimstone. The Sumerian texts speak of a nuclear conflict between warring factions of the Anunnaki, using what they call weapons of terror that poisoned the land and made it uninhabitable for centuries. A description that sounds eerily like the effects of atomic warfare. So, the cycle repeats. Every 3,600 years, the return of Nibiru brings with it contact, upheaval, and a new chapter for humanity. This is where the story pivots from ancient history to a chilling modern-day reality. For decades, Sitchin's theories were dismissed as fantasy. The cornerstone of his entire argument, a massive, undiscovered planet in our own solar system, was considered an impossibility. Mainstream astronomy had accounted for all the planets. There was nothing else out there, except they were wrong. For years, astronomers had been noticing anomalies in the orbits of objects in the far outer solar system, out beyond Neptune in a region called the Kuiper Belt. The orbits of these distant dwarf planets were strangely clustered, all tilted on the same axis, as if they were being shepherded by the immense gravity of a single, massive, unseen object. In 2016, two astronomers from Caltech, Mike Brown and Konstantin Batygin, published a groundbreaking paper. They had run the calculations. They proposed that the only thing that could explain these orbital oddities was the existence of a giant, unseen planet, a Planet 9. They calculated it would be about 10 times the mass of Earth, orbiting the Sun on a bizarre, highly elongated orbit that takes it anywhere from 10,000 to 20,000 years to complete. While the orbital period is different from Sitchin's 3,600 years, the core concept is identical. A real, massive planet, a member of our solar system, hiding in the dark. The scientific community went from ridicule to a frantic global search. They know something is out there, They can see its shadow. They can feel its gravitational breath. They just haven't pointed a telescope at it yet. Is this NIBIRU? Is modern science, after decades of denial, on the verge of proving the fundamental premise of the Sumerian texts? The implications are mind-blowing. The ancient story is not just a story. It has a physical, verifiable component that we're now detecting with our most advanced instruments. But the evidence doesn't stop in the sky. It's written in stone, right here on Earth. Consider the megalithic structures scattered across our planet. The Great Pyramids of Giza, aligned perfectly with the stars. The massive stone platform at Baalbek in Lebanon, containing stones weighing over 800 tons, far beyond the capacity of any known ancient or even modern crane to lift. The precision-cut walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where enormous stones are fitted together so perfectly a sheet of paper cannot slide between them. Official history tells us these were built with copper chisels and brute strength. But does that really make sense? Or does it make more sense that these were constructed with advanced technology? Perhaps the tools of the Anunnaki, who needed them as landing platforms, astronomical observatories, and administrative centres. The Sumerian texts describe the pyramids not as tombs for pharaohs, but as beacons for spacecraft, guiding them in for landing. The name for the Giza complex in ancient Egyptian corresponds to the northern and southern way of the gods. A celestial airport. What about our biology? We are still unravelling the human genome, a code of 3 billion letters. We have found genes responsible for diseases, for eye colour, for height. But we have also found strange anomalies that defy simple evolutionary explanation. There are 223 genes in the human body that appear to have no precedent, no evolutionary predecessor in the vertebrate tree of life. They just appear out of nowhere in us. The official explanation is that we acquired them from bacteria through a process called horizontal gene transfer. A possibility, but one that seems incredibly unlikely on such a scale. The Anunnaki hypothesis provides a much simpler, though more shocking explanation. These are not bacterial genes. These are fragments of Anunnaki DNA spliced into our genome thousands of years ago to make us stronger, smarter, and better servants. We are, quite literally, part alien. This brings us to the most important question of all, the one that hangs over this entire story like a shadow. The 3,600-year clock. When did it last tick? When is the next one due? Calculating the exact timing is difficult, as we are dealing with texts thousands of years old and celestial mechanics that are not fully understood. However, many who have studied Sitchin's work and the ancient calendars point to the period of the Exodus from Egypt, around 1600 BC, as a time of great upheaval consistent with the Nibiru Pass. The plagues of Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, these are often interpreted as natural disasters caused by the immense electromagnetic and gravitational effects of a massive planetary body passing close to Earth. If we take that as a potential anchor point, and we add 3,600 years, where does that land us? It lands us right here, right now, in the 21st century. Suddenly the world around us starts to look very different. The unprecedented acceleration of technology in the last 100 years, the rise of global communication, creating a planetary nervous system, the frantic push towards space exploration, as if we are subconsciously trying to get off the planet, the increase in seismic and volcanic activity, the dramatic and unpredictable shifts in our climate. Are these all just coincidences? Or are they the subtle, growing signs of Nibiru's approach? Is the planet itself responding to the gravitational pull of its long-lost twin? Are our own institutions and technologies evolving at a breakneck pace in preparation for a reunion we don't even consciously know is coming? What would a return look like? It would not be a fleet of flying saucers landing on the White House lawn. It would begin subtly. The gravitational effects would be felt first, an increase in earthquakes, tsunamis, and extreme weather. Then the electromagnetic effects would begin to disrupt our satellites, our power grids, our communications. The planet would be thrown into chaos, a modern society suddenly crippled. And into this chaos they would appear, not as invaders perhaps, but as saviours. The gods of old returning as they promised, to restore order to a world they created. But what would be their motive? Why return now? Perhaps their atmosphere needs another infusion of gold, and they're coming to check on their workforce. Perhaps they're coming to see how their experiment has turned out. Did we, the Lulu Amalu, evolve beyond our programming? Did we develop true consciousness, empathy, and free will in a way they never intended? Or perhaps the reason is darker. The Anunnaki were not a monolith. The texts are filled with stories of their own conflicts, their own politics, their own wars. Enlil, the commander, was often at odds with Enki, the scientist. They had different visions for humanity's future. Which faction is in control now? Are we to be culled, upgraded, or simply put back to work? The story is also deeply woven into the fabric of our religions. The Bible, for instance, in Genesis 6 speaks of the Nephilim, the sons of God, who came down to earth and took human wives, creating a hybrid race of mighty men who were of old, men of renown. This passage has puzzled theologians for centuries, but in the context of the Anunnaki, it is a perfect description. Anunnaki astronauts interbreeding with their human creations. The very concept of a single, all-powerful God, which emerged with Abraham, can be seen as a political and religious revolution. It was a rejection of the pantheon of flawed flesh and blood Anunnaki gods in favour of a higher, universal spiritual creator. Was this humanity's first great act of rebellion? A declaration of spiritual independence from our physical creators? This is not just a story about ancient aliens, it is a story about us. It redefines what it means to be human. If this is true, we are not a random product of cosmic chance. We are an engineered species, a hybrid, part earth animal, part star god. We have a dual nature. We have the instinctual territorial aggression of our primate ancestors. But we also have the capacity for genius, for art, for love, for reaching for the stars, inherited from the Anunnaki. Our entire history can be seen as a struggle between these two parts of ourselves, the battle between our base instincts and our divine potential. And now, the time of our Creator's return may be upon us. We are living in the window of prophecy. The search for Planet 9 is no longer fringe. It is a mainstream astronomical quest. The decoding of the human genome is revealing anomalies that defy simple explanation. Our world is experiencing a convergence of crises, environmental, political, and technological, that feels like a historical turning point. Are we being prepared for a revelation so profound it will shatter every religion, every government, and every individual's sense of identity? The final question is not whether you believe this story. The question is, what if it's true? What if the gods of our ancestors were not myths but memories? What if our destiny is not our own, and the owners of this planet are about to return to check on their property? We look to the skies for answers, scanning distant galaxies for signs of intelligent life, never considering that the most important message in human history was already delivered to us 6,000 years ago. written on simple clay, a message that says, "We made you, we left, and we are coming back." The 3,600-year prophecy is not about the end of the world. It is about the end of the world as we know it. It is about the beginning of a new chapter for humanity, a chapter in which we finally meet our makers and learn the truth of who and what we really are. The clock is ticking, the planet of the crossing is on its way, and we can do nothing but watch the skies and wait. Let's dissect that message. A message not of hope or of spiritual salvation, but of ownership. It reframes our entire existence as a long-term lease, and the landlords are on their way to inspect the property. To truly understand the weight of this, we need to look beyond just Enlil and Enki. The Anunnaki were not a unified force, they were a family, a royal, powerful, and deeply dysfunctional family, ruled from Nibiru by their father, Anu, the great king. Their conflicts were not petty squabbles, they were dynastic struggles for power and inheritance that played out across the canvas of our planet, using humanity as their pawns. Enlil was the commander. He was the heir apparent, a stern disciplinarian who saw humanity as little more than a tool, a biological machine created for a purpose. When we became too numerous, too loud, he saw it as an infestation to be cleansed. His seat of power was the city of Nippur, the command center from which he administered the Earth mission. Enki, his half-brother, was the chief scientist, a genius of genetics and engineering, but also a rebel. He was the one who saw a spark in his creation, a flicker of the Anunnaki fire he had used to ignite our DNA. He was constantly at odds with Enlil, a quiet advocate for the beings he had made. His city was Eridu, the very first city built on Earth, a centre of knowledge and forbidden wisdom. Their rivalry forms the central axis of human history, as recorded by the Sumerians. It was a cosmic battle of law versus grace, of servitude versus potential. Every major decision regarding humanity's fate was a negotiation, a conflict, or an outright deception between these two forces. And they were not alone. There were others, key players in this planetary drama. There was Ninmah, the chief medical officer, a brilliant geneticist who worked alongside Enki in the lab. The texts describe her as the head of the team of birth goddesses, the Anunnaki females who served as the first surrogates, bravely carrying the first hybrid children to term. Can you imagine the scene? A sterile laboratory, advanced biological equipment, and a being of immense power volunteering to gestate a creature that was part her and part primitive beast. This wasn't an act of sterile science, it was an act of profound biological commitment. Then there were the sons, Enlil's heir, Ninurta, a great warrior who fought battles for his father in advanced aircraft, and Enki's firstborn son, Marduk, who would become a central and terrifying figure in the story. Marduk was ambitious, brilliant, and resentful. He believed that rulership of Earth should belong to him, not his uncle Enlil. This single ambition would eventually plunge the ancient world into a war that would make the Great Flood look like a minor inconvenience. These weren't abstract deities floating on clouds. They were individuals with personalities, jealousies, and agendas. Their family politics dictated our destiny. Let's go back to the creation. The texts that describe it, like the Atrahasis epic, are not vague poems. They read like lab notes. They speak of isolating the genetic material, of fertilizing the hominid egg in glass-like vessels, of implanting the embryos. They list the trial and error process. The first creations were often defective, sterile mules, or creatures with deformities. They had to perfect the formula. They needed a workforce that was intelligent enough to understand commands and operate simple tools, but not so intelligent that they would question their own servitude. They calibrated us. They designed us for a purpose, and for a time it worked perfectly. Humanity served. We toiled in the mines of Africa, what the texts call the Abzu. We quarried the stone. We built their cities. And above us, in orbit, was another class of Anunnaki, the Igigi. These were the younger astronauts, the shuttle pilots. They manned the space station that circled the Earth, transferring the gold from our atmosphere to the larger transport ships that would then make the long journey back to Nibiru. It was the Igigi, not the miners on the ground, who first rebelled against Enlil's harsh command structure. They were tired of the long, lonely tours of duty in orbit. The tablets describe how they descended to Earth en masse, burning their tools in protest and surrounding Enlil's command centre. It was this second mutiny that truly solidified the need for a permanent, reliable, and self-replicating human workforce. But a problem soon emerged that Enki had likely anticipated and Enlil had feared. The Anunnaki males, stationed on Earth for centuries at a time, away from their own kind, began to notice the human females, their own creation. They were not only compatible, they were beautiful. This is the event recorded in Genesis 6, the taking of the daughters of men by the sons of God. This was a catastrophic breach of protocol. It diluted the royal bloodline. It created a hybrid class of demigods who were not fully human and not fully Anunnaki. It blurred the sacred line between creator and created. This, more than anything, infuriated Enlil. He saw humanity as a biological contamination, a project that had spun wildly out of control. The coming flood for him was a necessary, divine act of sterilization. After the flood, when Enki's deception was revealed and it was clear humanity had survived, a new strategy was needed. Enlil, furious but pragmatic, agreed to a new world order. They would no longer rule over a race of primitive slaves. They would elevate humanity to a new level. They would teach us. They divided the earth into 4 regions. The first, Mesopotamia, they kept for themselves. The second, the Nile Valley, was granted to a lineage descended from Enki. The third, the Indus Valley, was another centre of civilization. The fourth was a sacred region, a spaceport on the Sinai Peninsula. Kingship was lowered from heaven. Human kings were appointed as intermediaries, priest kings who communicated directly with their Anunnaki lords. This is the origin of the divine right of kings. The idea that the ruler is chosen by God was not a metaphor. In the beginning, it was literally true. The king was the foreman of the human workforce, reporting directly to the Anunnaki administrator of his city-state. And for over 1,000 years, this new order held. Civilization flourished under their direct guidance. But the old rivalries festered. The key antagonist was Marduk, Enki's son. He had been given the region of Egypt to rule, where he was known as Ra, but he coveted the ultimate prize, the main spaceport in the Sinai and supreme command of Earth. He saw the rise of his city, Babylon, as his divine right. He proclaimed himself the king of the gods, above Enlil, above everyone. This was blasphemy. This was an act of war. The conflict that followed, as described in texts Sitchin called the Pyramid Wars and the Earth Chronicles, was a civil war among the gods. Ninurta, Enlil's son and champion, waged war against Marduk and his human armies. The texts describe terrifying battles with weapons that shoot beams of light, that shake the mountains, that turn men to dust. They speak of Ninurta flying in a black divine bird, and using a weapon called the IMDU-GUD, which sounds chillingly like a guided missile. This war culminated in the ultimate horror. Fearing Marduk's final victory, a council of the Anunnaki, led by a reluctant Enlil, authorized the use of 7 weapons of terror against Marduk's key strongholds and the Sinai spaceport to deny him his prize. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were among the targets. The texts describe the moment of their use with chilling clarity. A terrifying flash, brighter than 1,000 suns, a mushroom cloud that rose to the heavens, an evil wind that swept across the land, poisoning the water, killing the crops, and making the people and animals die a horrible death. The description of the fallout, the radioactive poisoning, is unmistakable to a modern reader. Archaeologists have found evidence that supports this. In the Sinai, large stretches of land are covered in fused black rock, as if exposed to an intense, sudden heat. The Dead Sea, bordering the area where Sodom and Gomorrah were said to exist, is utterly lifeless, its waters unnaturally saline and radioactive to this day. Was this the result of a divine curse, or the lingering fallout of a prehistoric nuclear exchange? This event, around 2024 BC, was the end of an era. The Anunnaki, horrified by what they had done, by the destruction they had unleashed upon their own infrastructure and upon the earth, began to depart. The evil wind had made much of Sumer uninhabitable. Their great centres were abandoned. They retreated, leaving humanity to fend for itself for the first time. Marduk, though his armies were decimated, ultimately won. Babylon rose from the ashes and he became the dominant god of the new age. The story of the Anunnaki was rewritten, edited by Babylonian priests to elevate Marduk above all others. Other Anunnaki were demonized or forgotten. The historical record was deliberately corrupted, and as the Anunnaki presence faded from daily life into memory, and then into myth, their stories were carried across the world. The core group of 12 great Anunnaki became the 12 Olympians of the Greeks. Anu became Uranus, Enlil became Zeus, Enki became Poseidon. Inanna, a powerful and ambitious granddaughter of Enlil, became Aphrodite and Venus. Their stories of love, war and jealousy were retold, their advanced technology now described as magic and divine power. The same thing happened in Egypt, in India, in the Americas. The feathered serpent god of the Aztecs and Maya, Quetzalcoatl, was described as a wise, bearded, light-skinned being who came from the heavens, taught the arts of civilization, and promised to one day return. This is the universal template, a civilizing god, a promise of return. Are these all independent myths, or are they the scattered fading echoes of a single global historical event? The administration of planet Earth by a race of extraterrestrial colonists. This perspective forces us to look at our most sacred stories with new eyes. Take the Tower of Babel. The Bible describes humanity united with one language, attempting to build a tower to reach the heavens. An angry God comes down, confuses their language, and scatters them across the earth. Now view this through the Anunnaki lens. The tower was a Shem, a rocket. Humanity, using the knowledge given to them by the Anunnaki, was attempting to build their own space launch vehicle in Babylon, Marduk's territory. Enlil, seeing this as the ultimate transgression, his slave race trying to seize the stars for themselves, descended and put a stop to it. He didn't magically confuse their language. He simply broke up the project, scattering the workforce and deliberately introducing different dialects and cultures to ensure humanity would remain divided and never again be able to unite in a way that could challenge Anunnaki supremacy. It was a calculated act of social engineering. Our modern divisions, our wars, our tribalism, were they seeded on purpose as a control mechanism? Consider the Anunnaki lifespan. Why were they seen as immortal? It's a matter of perspective, of relativity. They were not immortal, but their lives were incomprehensibly long by our standards. 1 year for them, one orbit of Nibiru is 3,600 years for us. An Anunnaki who lived for just 10 of their years would experience 36,000 years of Earth history. They could personally witness the entire rise and fall of human civilization since the last ice age. To us, they would be gods. To them, we would be like mayflies born and dying in a single day. Our entire lives, our ambitions, our wars would be fleeting moments in their long, slow perception of time. This explains their patience, their long-term planning, and perhaps their casual cruelty. Do you mourn the passing of a single ant in an anthill you have been observing for a week? This brings us back to the evidence beneath our feet and in our skies. The search for Planet 9 is intensifying. They haven't found it yet because they are looking in the wrong way. They are searching for the faint, reflected light of the sun from an object billions of miles away in the dark. But the Sumerians gave us another clue. They described Nibiru not as a cold, dark rock, but as a radiant body, a second sun that glowed with its own internal heat. If this is true, then we should not be looking with optical telescopes, but with infrared telescopes, searching for a faint source of heat against the cold background of deep space. And indeed, some of the most powerful infrared surveys are now methodically scanning the very patches of sky where Batygin and Brown predict Planet 9 should be. The genetic evidence is also becoming more difficult to ignore. The Human Genome Project was a monumental achievement, but one of its most surprising discoveries was how little of our DNA actually codes for proteins. Over 95% of it was initially dismissed as junk, but we are now discovering that this junk DNA is not junk at all. It is a complex operating system filled with switches and regulators that turn genes on and off. What if this is where the Anunnaki legacy truly lies? Not in the 223 alien genes, but in the vast, silent stretches of our own code. What if our genome is like a computer with most of its programs deactivated? The potential for telepathy, for extended lifespan, for higher states of consciousness. What if the code for all of that is already inside you, simply switched off, waiting for an external signal, a celestial password, to reactivate it? Perhaps the rising energy and frequency of an approaching Nibiru is the very key needed to unlock our dormant potential. This idea is both terrifying and exhilarating. It means we are more than we think we are. We are fallen royalty living in genetic amnesia. And think of the implications for our own space programs. We send probes to Mars searching for microbial life. We build ever larger telescopes to look for Earth-like planets light years away. It is an expensive, almost desperate search for cosmic companionship, for proof that we are not alone. What if the entire endeavour is a profound cosmic irony? What if NASA is, in effect, a cargo cult, a primitive tribe building metallic effigies of the chariots of their gods, trying to reach a heaven they don't realise is simply the next planet over? The knowledge of rocketry, of orbital mechanics, of astrophysics, was it discovered or was it remembered? Is it possible that the scientific explosion of the 20th century was not an act of pure human genius, but the slow subconscious rediscovery of a science that was taught to our ancestors millennia ago and then brutally suppressed? This places every strange event, every unexplained phenomenon in a new context. the persistent sightings of UFOs, often described as silent, metallic craft capable of impossible maneuvers. Are these visitors from another star system? Or are they simply Anunnaki drones and scout ships monitoring their experiment during their long absence? Keeping an eye on the Lulu Amelu, making sure we don't destroy the planet before their scheduled return. The patterns of history suddenly snap into focus. The 3,600-year cycle becomes a metronome, beating time behind the chaos of human events. Around 3,600 BC, the birth of Sumer. Fast forward 1,600 years to the Anunnaki nuclear conflict, and the Exodus around 2000 to 1600 BC. The timeline gets a little fuzzy here due to historical devastation, but the rhythm is there. The next major pulse of civilization, the rise of classical Greece, the axial age where figures like Buddha, Confucius, and Zoroaster appeared all at once, seems to happen in the centuries following the halfway point of the cycle, around 1,800 years after the last pass. Was this a period when Nibiru's influence was at its weakest, allowing humanity to develop its own spiritual and philosophical ideas free from direct intervention? And now, here we are. Another 1,800 years have passed since that midpoint. We are back in the window of return. The clock has come full circle. The owners are coming home. They left a planet of scattered, terrified Bronze Age survivors. They will return to find a global interconnected civilization of 8 billion people, armed with nuclear weapons and digital technology, a species that has walked on its own moon. Will they be proud? Will they be horrified? Will they see us as a successful experiment that has matured into a partner? Or will they see us as a slave revolt that has gotten dangerously out of hand, a planetary infestation that has acquired the tools of the gods and now threatens the cosmic order? The answer to that question depends entirely on which faction is in control of Nibiru now. Is it the faction of Enlil, who always sought to control and limit us? Or is it the faction of Enki, who saw us as his children and secretly wished for our liberation? The fate of our species may hang on the outcome of a political struggle that took place thousands of years ago, on a world we have never seen. We have a choice. We can dismiss this all as myth, as the fantastical interpretation of a dead language. We can continue to believe that we are the sole masters of our destiny, a random accident of evolution on a lonely rock. Or we can consider the evidence, the impossible knowledge of the Sumerians, the global flood myths, the megalithic structures that defy explanation, the anomalies in our own genome, the mathematical ghost in our solar system, Planet 9. We can accept the terrifying, awe-inspiring possibility that our history is not what we have been told. Our gods did not abandon us. They are just on a very long commute. And the next stop is Earth. This brings us to one of the most compelling and dangerous figures in the entire pantheon, Inanna, known to the Akkadians as Ishtar. She was the granddaughter of Enlil, and she inherited all of his ambition, but none of his restraint. She was the goddess of love and war, a being of terrifying contradictions. She was not content to simply administrate a city-state. She wanted it all. Her personal stories, recorded in epic poems, are not allegories. They are accounts of a power-hungry royal who used seduction, deception, and outright theft to climb the ladder of power. One famous text describes how she travelled to Eridu, the city of her great-uncle Enki, with the express purpose of tricking him. She got the brilliant old scientist drunk on wine and coaxed him into giving her the sacred Mes. What are the Mes? The texts list over 100 of them. They are described as the fundamental principles of civilization. Things like kingship, law, priesthood, but also crafts like leatherworking and basket weaving. Conventional scholars call these abstract concepts. But what if they were not concepts? What if they were technologies? What if each ME was a piece of software, a database, or a physical device, like a flash drive of cosmic knowledge? Inanna loaded these MEs onto her boat of heaven and fled back to her own city of Uruk, with a furious and hungover Enki in hot pursuit. She succeeded. She essentially stole the operating system for civilization and installed it in her own city, instantly elevating it to a superpower. This wasn't a myth about wisdom. This was a story of corporate espionage and technology theft on a planetary scale. It demonstrates a crucial point. The Anunnaki were not a unified hive mind. They were individuals, competing for resources, for glory, and for control. Their advanced technology was not shared freely. It was hoarded. It was the source of their power over us and over each other. The ultimate pass of this technology, the master control system, was an object known as the Tablet of Destinies. This wasn't a clay tablet. The texts describe it as an object worn on the chest of the commander, Enlil. It could decree the fates, control the movements of the heavens, and issue commands that could not be disobeyed. Does that sound like mythology? Or does it sound like a portable supercomputer with administrative access to their global and orbital systems? A device that could control the weather, trigger earthquakes, or shut down the power grid of an entire civilization with a single command. The struggle to possess this tablet is a recurring theme in the texts. On one occasion, it was stolen by a renegade bird-like creature, plunging the world into chaos until Enlil's son, Ninurta, hunted the thief down in a spectacular aerial battle. These were the tools they used to manage their unruly human population and to wage war on one another. We were living inside their computer simulation, and they held the master password. Now let's go back to the gold. The story that it was needed solely for Nibiru's atmosphere is elegant, but it may be incomplete. It might even be a cover story. The official reason, given for a much deeper, more esoteric purpose. Ancient traditions, from Egyptian alchemy to the legends of the Philosopher's Stone, are obsessed with gold, not as a currency, but as a substance of transformation. They speak of processing it into a fine white powder, a monoatomic state, where the metal's atoms no longer form a lattice. In this state, it is said to have incredible properties, a superconductor at room temperature, a substance that can bend space-time, and most importantly, a powerful accelerant for consciousness and a key to biological longevity. What if the Anunnaki were ingesting this substance? What if it was the source of their extended lifespans, their incredible mental abilities, and their seemingly divine powers? This would change everything. They weren't just mining a raw material to fix a planetary problem. They were harvesting a drug, a substance that maintained their godhood. This makes their need for Earth, and for us, infinitely more desperate. It wasn't about planetary repair. It was about survival and maintaining their elite status. And it makes our role even more tragic. We were not just slaves mining a mineral. We were workers in a cosmic drug operation, producing the very substance that kept our masters immortal and powerful, while we lived and died in the dust. This casts the entire history of gold in a new, sinister light. Humanity's own irrational, instinctual obsession with this soft, yellow metal. The wars fought over it, the empires built on it. Is this a natural economic development, or is it a genetic echo, a programmed instinct left in us by our creators, a deep-seated command to value, seek, and hoard the one thing our gods desired above all else. Now let's return to the ground, to the horrifying aftermath of that nuclear attack in 2024 BC. The Sumerian texts that describe it are known as lamentations. They are heartbreaking poems that speak of a ghost wind that swept the land, of people melting in the streets, of rivers running with poisoned water. It was the end of the world. The great Sumerian civilization, the jewel of the Anunnaki project, collapsed almost overnight. Its fields became barren, its people scattered, its great cities abandoned to the radioactive dust. This was not a slow decline. This was an apocalypse, and out of this chaos walks a familiar figure, Abraham. The Bible tells us he was called by God to leave his home city of Ur, but the texts paint a more detailed picture. Ur was on the edge of the fallout zone. The evil wind was blowing towards it. Abraham's departure was not a casual migration. It was a desperate evacuation. And who was the God who guided him? The texts suggest it was an Anunnaki lord, perhaps one of Enlil's own sons, who had not abandoned the region. This lord guided Abraham's family, a carefully selected genetic line, away from the contamination. Why? To preserve a pure human bloodline, untainted by the chaos and intermingling that would follow the collapse. This was a salvage operation. The Anunnaki had wrecked their own project, and a small faction was trying to save the data, to preserve the core human stock they had worked so hard to create. The entire story of the Hebrew people, their covenant, their status as a chosen people, can be seen in this context. They were not chosen for spiritual salvation. They were chosen for genetic preservation. A royal bloodline of the Lulu Amalu kept pure for a future purpose we still do not understand. This act of preservation also required a place of safety, a new command centre, far from the poisoned lands of Sumer. The texts describe Enlil and his clan establishing a new sacred city, a new mission control. That city was Jerusalem. Think about the staggering implications of that, the most contested piece of real estate on the planet, a holy site for three major world religions, may have been chosen not for any spiritual reason, but for its strategic importance as a post-apocalyptic Anunnaki headquarters. The conflicts that rage over it to this day could be the faint, violent echoes of a celestial family feud that is thousands of years old. But where did they go? When the Anunnaki departed, did they all make the long journey back to NIBIRU, or did some stay behind, hidden, watching? For an answer, we only have to look up. At the moon. Our moon is the strangest object in the solar system. It is far too large for a planet of our size. It is in a perfect, tidally locked orbit, always showing us the same face. Its density is bizarrely low, and seismic instruments left by the Apollo astronauts showed that it rings like a massive, hollow gong for hours when struck by meteorites. What if the moon is not what we think it is? The Sumerians assigned it to one of the highest-ranking Anunnaki, Nanasin, a son of Enlil. It was his domain. What if it was their primary observation post, a forward operating base, perfectly positioned to monitor the Earth? Perhaps it's even more than that. The hollow nature, the strange resonant properties, these have led some to propose the unthinkable, that the moon is at least partially artificial. A hollowed-out worldlet turned into a giant spacecraft or monitoring station and placed in Earth's orbit in the deep past. It sounds impossible, but it would explain everything. The perfect circular orbit. The way its size in the sky perfectly matches the size of the sun, giving us perfect solar eclipses, a statistical absurdity. It would be the ultimate hiding place, a colossal watchtower disguised as a natural satellite, the perfect place from which to manage the Earth project, and to wait out the long centuries until NIBIRU's return. The knowledge they possessed, the science of genetics, astronomy, and energy, did not completely vanish when they retreated into the shadows. It was preserved, but in secret. It became the foundation of the ancient mystery schools. The esoteric traditions of Egypt, Greece, and Babylon were not about superstition. They were about preserving the fragmented science of the gods. Think of the Hermetic principle, as above, so below. This wasn't just a philosophical statement. This was a precise instruction, a blueprint, a declaration that the cosmic order, the celestial architecture, mirrored the terrestrial, that the secrets of the heavens held the keys to understanding our world, and perhaps our very origins. What if we are living within a meticulously crafted system, a grand design where even our impossibly perfect moon plays a role far beyond simple celestial mechanics? If this staggering knowledge was once common, then what else have we forgotten? What incredible truths lie just beneath the surface of our accepted history, waiting to be rediscovered? We may think we understand the universe, but the deeper we dig, the more profound the questions become. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't what is out there, but who put it there and why. So what do you believe? Does your conventional view of reality still hold, or has a new possibility begun to dawn? Drop your insights in the comments below, and let's explore this together.